It was the kind of silence New York only knew when the wrong man was in charge, and tonight, that man was just getting started. The rain had been falling since dusk, slicking the cobblestones of Mulberry Street until they shone like black glass. Streetcars hissed along their tracks, and somewhere far off, a saxophone bled a slow, sad note into the night. I walked alone, coat collar up against the wind, a cigarette hanging lazy from my lips. Every step echoed between the tenements like the city was listening. New York in the early 30s wasn't just a place, it was a living thing. The sidewalks pulsed, the windows watched, and every doorway had a story. Some good, most bad. The Lower East Side had been my classroom since I was a kid, teaching lessons in survival, ambition, and when to keep your mouth shut. And tonight, it was reminding me of the most important one: power makes people disappear. I was headed toward an unmarked door just off Canal. No sign, no welcome, just a single bulb buzzing above the frame. The kind of place where deals were made without a handshake, where a man's eyes told you more than his mouth ever could. Inside, there'd be a table, a bottle, and a conversation that would decide who ran this city next year, maybe even next week. I lit another cigarette and let the smoke curl up into the cold air. A couple of kids darted past me, their shoes splashing in the puddles. They didn't look twice at me, smart kids. In this neighborhood, you didn't stop to admire a man walking alone at night unless you had a death wish or a badge. And the cops? Well, most of them worked for one side or the other. The doorman saw me coming and didn't move. Big guy, face like a brick wall, eyes like marbles. He didn't need to frisk me, we'd both been in this business long enough to know I wouldn't walk into a meeting with a piece unless I planned to use it. And if I planned to use it, I wouldn't be walking in at all. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and whispers. 3 men sat at the back table. One was Joe Masseria, Joe the boss, playing with a stack of coins, letting them dance between his fingers. Another was Benny from Brooklyn, a guy I trusted about as far as I could throw him. And the third, well, that was the reason I was here. A new face. Out of town. Clean suit, polished shoes, smile that didn't reach his eyes. Lucky, Masseria said, not looking up from his coins. You're late. I slid into the chair opposite him, leaning back, letting my eyes drift over the room. Clock says I'm right on time, I answered. Always control the pace. Make them come to you. The conversation started slow, talk about shipments, numbers, territory lines. But underneath it, I could feel the tension, like 2 wires pulled tight. This wasn't about business. It was about seeing who'd blink first. The new guy finally spoke. I hear you're the man who wants to change the way things are done in New York. His voice was smooth, but I caught the flicker in his eyes, curiosity, maybe a little fear. Change? I said, smiling just enough to make him wonder what I was thinking. No. I just want things to run smoother. Less blood, more green. Masseria's coin stopped moving. That was his tell. He didn't like talk about less blood. To him, respect was written in red. I knew right then this night wasn't about making peace. It was about drawing lines in the dark, lines you couldn't erase once the sun came up. And if I wanted to walk those streets tomorrow, I had to make sure my name was on the right side of them. The meeting ended with no deals, no handshakes, just 3 men walking into the night with their own plans. I stepped back into the rain, letting it wash the smoke off my coat. The city was still silent, but now it wasn't the quiet of a sleeping giant. It was the quiet before a gunshot. And in my business, that silence never lasted long. Before I ruled anything, I was just another skinny kid stepping off a boat, clutching a suitcase that smelled like salt and home. It was April 1906 when we docked at Ellis Island. I was 9 years old, wearing shoes a size too big and a cap my mother had sewn by hand. The air smelled different, sharper, like coal smoke and wet rope. I didn't know it yet, but this place was going to teach me everything I needed to survive. The officials shouted in English, a language that sounded like someone chewing marbles. My father answered for us, fumbling with the words, nodding too much. I watched his eyes dart around, taking in the size of the place, the noise, the endless line of people clutching their lives in cloth bundles. My mother kept a hand on my shoulder the whole time, like she thought I might slip away in the crowd. We moved into a cramped apartment on the Lower East Side, where the walls were thin enough to hear the couple next door fight about bread money. The streets were a maze of pushcarts, shouting vendors, and kids who'd run you over for a nickel. My father worked when he could, my mother cooked what we could afford, and me, I started learning fast. School? I went when I had to. But my real education was on the streets. I learned English from other immigrant kids, half of it curse words. I learned which alleys to cut through, which corners to avoid, and which shopkeepers would look the other way if you lifted an apple. That's where I met Meyer Lansky. He was just a small, sharp-eyed Jewish kid then, standing up to some bigger boys trying to take his coins. I didn't know it at the time, but that moment was the start of something that would shape both our lives. We didn't talk much that first day, just a nod, the kind that says asterisk I see you. Asterisk a few years later, Meyer introduced me to another kid, Benjamin Siegel. Bugsy, though no one dared call him that to his face in those days. He had a grin that could charm a nun and a temper that could burn down a block. The three of us, we didn't look like much. But we had something, brains, guts, and a shared understanding that we were never going to be content shining shoes or hauling crates for the rest of our lives. By my teens, I was running small jobs with the 5 Points gang. They taught me the basics, how to move contraband, how to make someone pay without breaking too many bones, and most importantly, how to smile while you did it. The streets were full of guys who could throw a punch. The smart ones knew when not to. New York back then was a city of tribes. Italians stuck with Italians, Jews with Jews, Irish with Irish. But me and Meyer, we crossed those lines. We saw something bigger, a way to make the whole city work for us, not just one neighborhood. That idea was dangerous. It made enemies. But it also made us valuable. One night, I remember walking home through the narrow streets, the gas lamps casting long shadows. My shoes were wet from the gutter, my pockets empty. I passed a shop window and caught my reflection, cap low, eyes steady. I didn't see a kid anymore. I saw someone who was gonna own these streets one day. Not by being the toughest. By being the smartest. Still, toughness had its place. One winter evening, I got jumped by 3 guys from a rival crew. They roughed me up, stole what little I had. When I limped home, my father barely looked at me. "This is America," he said in Sicilian. "You want respect? You take it." I took it. Not from those 3 guys, from everyone. Little by little. Job by job. $1 here, a favor there. I learned the names that mattered, the places where the real decisions were made. And I learned something else, in this city, nothing stayed the same for long. By the time Prohibition rolled around in 1920, I wasn't some street kid anymore. I was a man with connections, ambition, and 2 friends who'd walk into fire with me. The city was about to drown in bootleg liquor, and I planned to be holding the glass. The Lower East Side had been my training ground. Now it was time to graduate, to take the lessons I'd learned from those narrow streets, from the pushcarts and the gang corners, and turn them into something bigger. Something that would make my name known from Brooklyn to the Bronx. And deep down, I knew one thing for certain, I didn't come all the way from Sicily to play small. In our business, you don't shake hands to seal a deal, you shake to see if the other guy's got a gun. By the late 20s, I was sitting at tables I'd only dreamed about as a kid, rooms where the air was thick with smoke, whiskey, and the weight of decisions that could change the city overnight. At the head of most of those tables sat Joe the Boss Masseria. Big man, big voice, big ego. He liked to pretend we were all family, but everyone knew Joe's idea of family meant asterisk he eats first, and maybe you get the scraps. Asterisk he had the old Sicilian ways baked into his bones, loyalty above all, no mixing with outsiders, and a love for brute force when a quiet word would do. Don't get me wrong, the man had power. He'd been running things for years. But the city was changing faster than he could keep up. Prohibition had turned New York into a gold rush for anyone smart enough to tap into it. Liquor was the river, and the speakeasies were gold mines. The Irish, the Jews, the Italians, everyone wanted a piece. The problem was, Joe still thought you could keep the pie in one kitchen. I knew better. I'd seen what could happen when you brought the right people together, when you stopped worrying about where a man came from and started thinking about what he could bring to the table. That's where the trouble started. It was a Tuesday night. Meetings like these always happened on Tuesdays. Maybe it made the week feel like it had a rhythm. I walked into one of Joe's favorite spots, a back room behind an unremarkable Italian restaurant in Little Italy. The pasta was overcooked, but the wine was good, and Joe liked it that way. He sat at the center, counting out bills like he was dealing cards. Around him, lieutenants and captains shifted in their chairs, waiting for him to speak. I took a seat across from him, leaning back just enough to make it clear I wasn't intimidated. "Lucky," Joe said, without looking up, "I hear you've been making deals with the Jews." I smiled. "Myers got connections. We make more money together than apart." Joe finally looked at me, his eyes like cold marbles. "This is not how we do things. Our people, we take care of our own." "Our people," I said quietly, "are anybody who can make us rich." The room went still. You could hear the clink of a glass in the kitchen out front. Joe's lip curled just a little. It was the kind of look that told me I'd crossed an invisible line and there was no going back. That night, after the meeting, I stepped outside into the narrow alley behind the restaurant. Meyer was waiting there, leaning against the brick wall, smoke drifting from his cigarette. "How'd it go?" he asked. "He's not gonna change," I said. "Which means we're gonna have to." We stood there in the cold, the city buzzing faintly beyond the alley walls. In that moment, I knew what the future looked like. It wasn't going to be decided in rooms like the one I just left. It was going to be decided in blood, in alleys, in parked cars, in the backrooms where whispers turned into orders. Over the next few weeks, the tension kept ratcheting up. Joe's men started shadowing mine. Deals I'd set up mysteriously fell apart. One night, a truckload of my liquor vanished before it reached the docks. That wasn't bad luck, that was a message. So I sent one back. It was subtle at first, a supplier suddenly refusing to deal with Joe unless he went through me, a shipment of his protected goods ending up in a police warehouse, thanks to an anonymous tip. Nothing flashy. Just enough to make him realize that I wasn't some kid he could push around. But Joe? He wasn't the type to back down. And in our world, pride was more dangerous than a Tommy gun. It made men do stupid things. The real turning point came during a late-night sit-down in a dimly lit club uptown. Joe was there, flanked by his most trusted men. Across from him sat a representative from Maranzano's crew, the other big player in town, and one with his own ideas about how things should be run. I wasn't supposed to speak. I wasn't even supposed to be there. But I watched Joe's bluster, his threats, his refusal to compromise, and I saw the future endless war until one side was wiped out. And I knew something else: neither side really deserved to win. Not the way they were playing it. That night, walking home alone, I decided that the only way forward was to make my own side. One that didn't answer to old men clinging to the past. The next morning, I poured myself a coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and started writing a list. Not of enemies, those took care of themselves. I made a list of allies. Men I could trust. Men who wanted something bigger than what Joe or Maranzano were offering. It was a short list. But it was enough. From that day forward, I wasn't just playing Joe's game, I was building my own. And sooner or later, we were gonna find out which one of us had the better cards. In this life, you learn quick: loyalty's just another word for the price you haven't named yet. But some guys don't got a price. Meyer Lansky was one of them. Bugsy Siegel was the other. I'd known Meyer since we were kids, running the streets, our shoes worn thin and our eyes always on the next score. He was small, quiet, but sharp, the kind of guy who could read a room before he even walked into it. You could trust him with your money, your life, and maybe more importantly, your secrets. Bugsy? Well, Benny was different. Benny was the spark in the powder keg. Handsome, reckless, with a smile that made you think you were safe right before he set the whole block on fire. Guys like that don't live long in our line of work. But while they do, they make sure everyone remembers their name. The three of us didn't look like much on paper. An Italian, a Jew, and a kid who thought he was Clark Gable with a pistol. But we had something the other crews didn't: trust. We didn't sign contracts or shake on deals. We just knew if one of us said we were in, we were in. No questions. That kind of loyalty doesn't come cheap, but it also doesn't happen by accident. We'd been through scraps together, real scraps. Back alley fights over liquor routes, late night police chases, times when the wrong move would have left one of us bleeding in the gutter. And every time, no matter how bad it got, we walked out together. One night stands out in my mind. It was a winter evening, the wind sharp enough to cut through your coat. We were holed up in a little speakeasy on the east side, the kind where the floorboards creaked under your feet and the bartender knew better than to ask for names. We were sitting in the back, sipping rye, when a couple of toughs from another crew came swaggering in. They didn't like us, not because of anything we'd done, but because we didn't play by their rules. We mixed crews, crossed lines they wouldn't cross. They called us traitors. Mutts. One of them walked right up to our table and stared down at Meyer. "You're sittin' with the wrong people," he said. Meyer didn't even look up from his drink. "No," he said quietly. "I'm sittin' with the only people." That's when Bugsy stood. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just smiled and said, "If you're gonna start something, start it now so I can finish my drink while it's still cold." The two toughs looked at each other, muttered something, and backed off. That's the thing about loyalty: when people see you've got it, they think twice about testing it. Outside of work, we had our moments too. Meyer liked to play cards, never for big stakes, just enough to keep it interesting. Bugsy liked the movies. He'd drag us to the theater to see whatever gangster picture was out, laughing in the dark about how they always got it wrong. Me? I liked the quiet nights, the ones where it was just the three of us in some backroom, talking about the future. We weren't just dreaming about money, we were dreaming about control. Not just in New York, but everywhere. Thing is, in this city, friendships like ours stood out. And standing out wasn't always safe. People started watching us closer, wondering what we were planning. Some thought they could buy us off, offer Meyer a better cut, tempt Bugsy with flashier jobs, whisper promises to me about bigger territory. None of it worked. We had something money couldn't touch. And that's why I knew, when the real war came, these were the guys I'd have on my side. Because in a city where everything's for sale, the rarest thing you can own is a friend you can't buy. Some wars start with speeches. Ours started with bodies turning up in the gutter. It was 1930, and the streets of New York were already tense, too many crews fighting over the same rackets, too many egos in the same small rooms. But when Joe the Boss Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano locked horns, the whole city knew something big was coming. Masseria was the old guard, heavy, brutal, set in his ways. Maranzano was different. He'd come from Castellammarese del Golfo in Sicily, bringing with him a crew of men who looked like they'd stepped straight out of the old country. They called them Mustache Pete's, old-school mafiosi who believed in Sicilian bloodlines, rigid hierarchy, and keeping outsiders out. On the surface, the fight was about territory. But underneath, it was about control: who would decide the future of the Italian underworld in New York. And it wasn't going to be decided at a table. It was going to be decided on the streets. The first hit came quiet: a Masseria man found slumped in his car in Brooklyn, 2 in the chest, 1 in the head. No witnesses. No noise. Just a message. By the end of that week, there were 3 more bodies, all loyal to Masseria. I'd been playing both sides, not out of cowardice, but strategy. I had friends in both camps, and I wasn't about to let someone else's pride decide my fate. Meyer agreed. Bugsy, well, he was itching for action, but he followed my lead. The hits started coming faster. Drive-bys in Little Italy. Shotgun blasts in dim stairwells. Guys disappearing on their way to dinner, never to be seen again. The newspapers started calling it a gang war, but they didn't know the half of it. This wasn't just one crew against another, this was a street chess game with blood for pawns. Every meeting was tense. You never knew if the guy across from you was a friend, an enemy, or a friend who'd been bought since you last saw him. We stopped going anywhere without backup. Even walking into a restaurant meant checking every face, every exit. I remember one night, sitting in a speakeasy with Meyer, when a couple of Maranzano's guys walked in. They didn't come over, didn't say a word, just sat at a table by the door and watched. We finished our drinks in silence, then walked out the back. You didn't wait around to see what might happen. Still, I wasn't ready to pick a side. Not yet. I could see the cracks forming in both camps. Masseria was losing men faster than he could replace them, and his stubbornness was wearing thin. Maranzano, for all his old-world discipline, didn't understand New York the way I did. He thought tradition would keep him safe. But tradition doesn't stop a bullet. Winter turned to spring, and the war only got hotter. One of Masseria's top men was gunned down on Mulberry Street in broad daylight. The crowd scattered, but the message was clear: no one was untouchable. We started hearing rumors about meetings in dark basements, plans being drawn up for a final push. The word was, whoever made the first big move could end the war. One afternoon, I was called to meet with Joe himself. He sat in his favorite chair, playing with that stack of coins he loved so much. He talked about loyalty, about how I'd been with him from the start. Then he leaned forward and said, "It's time to choose, Lucky." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I thought about the blood already spilled, the bodies dumped in rivers, the families left behind. I thought about what this war was really about: not honor, not tradition, but power. And I thought about who I wanted holding it when the smoke cleared. When I left that meeting, I knew 2 things: the war wasn't ending anytime soon, and if I wanted to survive it, I'd have to be the one to end it. On my terms. The city felt different after that, heavier, like the air itself was waiting for the next gunshot. You could smell the fear in the backrooms, in the way men kept their voices low and their hands close to their coats. But fear? Fear was just another weapon. And I was ready to use it. They say in this life you're either at the table, or you're on the menu. Joe the boss never saw that he was about to be served. By early 31, the Castellammarese War had ground the city down to nerves and ashes. Masseria was bleeding men, losing territory, and still acting like he was king of the block. He thought fear and tradition would keep us glued to his side. He didn't realize fear can turn into resentment when a man's burying too many friends. I'd sat through enough of Joe's meetings to know he'd never change. He liked his coins, his whiskey, and the sound of his own voice. But strategy? He was still fighting like it was 1910, muscle first, brains later. That was a death sentence in a city that was changing faster than the subway schedule. Meyer and I started talking in whispers. We knew the war couldn't end with Joe still breathing. Maranzano might have been old world, but at least he had a head for organization. And if I played it right, I could make him think I was his golden boy right up until I wasn't. The plan had to be clean. No witnesses. No noise. It couldn't look like a hit from the outside, at least not at first. I knew Joe's habits, his favorite haunts. One of them was a little Coney Island joint called Nuova Villa Tomorrow. He liked the seafood there, the wine, the way the owner treated him like royalty. He also liked to play cards in the back, away from the street. That was where we'd do it. I sold it to Joe like it was nothing. Come on, boss. Just a quiet hand of cards, a good meal. You need a break. He bought it. Maybe he thought I was finally showing the loyalty he'd been harping about for months. Maybe he was just tired. The day came crisp and gray. I got there early with a couple of the boys I could trust: Benny Bugsy Siegel, Vito Genovese, Albert Anastasia. Not exactly choir boys. We set the table, shuffled the cards, made it look like any other friendly afternoon. Joe walked in smiling, coat over his arm, hat tilted just so. He sat down, ordered his usual spaghetti with clams, and we played a few hands. I kept my eyes on the cards, not on the clock. You don't rush a moment like this. When the signal came, it was as quiet as it was final. Chairs scraped, metal flashed, and before Joe could push back from the table, the air was thick with the sound of gunfire. Short bursts. Tight groups. The kind of work you only see from men who know exactly what they're doing. Joe's head slumped forward, his coins spilling across the table. The spaghetti was still steaming when the blood started to soak into the white tablecloth. No speeches. No drama. Just another body in a city that chewed them up daily. We left through the back, just like we'd planned. By the time the papers got hold of it, the story was already shifting. Gangland slaying. Mob boss gunned down. Nobody could prove who pulled the trigger, and I wasn't in the mood to correct them. That night, I poured myself a drink and thought about what we'd done. Joe the boss had been a giant in our world. But giants fall the same way anyone else does: fast, hard, and without warning. And now, the war was almost over. Almost. It's a funny thing about power: the moment you take it, you start counting the ways it can be taken from you. With Joe the boss out of the picture, the streets went quiet for the first time in months. No drive-bys, no ambushes, no funerals every other week. The Castellammarese War was done. Maranzano sat on the throne now, the undisputed capo di tutti capi, boss of all bosses. On paper, I was his golden boy. His right hand. The kid who helped him win the war. He'd call me into his office, all marble desk and heavy drapes, and talk about the future. Charlie, he'd say, we will bring order. Structure. The days of chaos are finished. He wasn't wrong about structure. He divided the city into 5 families, each with its own boss, underboss, and consigliere. He handed out territories like a king doling out land to his lords. He gave me the biggest piece of Manhattan, a real empire in the making. But here's the thing: Maranzano was old school. Not just in how he dressed or the way he crossed himself before a meal, in how he thought. He ran things like a Roman emperor, and he saw everyone else as subjects. And me? I wasn't made to be anyone's subject. The more he talked about purging the ranks, about removing threats, the more I realized I was next on the list. He'd seen me work. He knew I was ambitious. And ambition scared him. He started surrounding himself with men from Sicily, guys who spoke in whispers and kept knives close to their belts. One afternoon, Meyer Lansky dropped a quiet word in my ear. Lucky, he's planning something. You and me both know it. And I did. You don't survive in this game without feeling the shift in the air before it hits you. So I flipped the script. If Maranzano was gonna move against me, I'd move first. I reached out to a few fellas from the other side of the law, not Italian. That was the genius of it. Maranzano expected a Sicilian knife, not an Irish gun. We picked the date, September 10, 1931. He was expecting a meeting with IRS agents in his office. What he got instead was 4 of my boys dressed like government men, briefcases and all. They walked in calm as priests, shook his hand, and before Maranzano could call for his bodyguards, the steel came out. Quick. Clean. Clinical. No shouting. No speeches. Just the end of an era. I wasn't there, that was the point. Plausible deniability. But when I heard the news, I knew New York had just changed forever. The title boss of all bosses died with Maranzano. I wasn't interested in wearing a crown that put a target on my head. Instead, we'd run the city like a board of directors, the commission. No more one-man rule. Every family had a voice. It wasn't democracy, but it was the closest thing Cosa Nostra was ever gonna get. And it worked. For a while. But as I lit a cigarette that night, looking out over the skyline, I couldn't shake the thought, in this city, peace never lasts. Not for men like me. They said I killed the boss of all bosses. Truth is, I killed the idea of one. After Maranzano hit the floor, the whole city was holding its breath. Guys in every borough were wondering, who's in charge now? The answer was simple, all of us and none of us. See, I've been thinking for a while, one man on top? He's just a bigger target. You want stability? You need balance. So I started drawing it up right there in my apartment, over a bottle of rye and a pack of smokes. A council, the commission, made up of the bosses of the 5 families. Decisions by vote. Disputes settled at the table, not in the streets. Meyer was all for it. Like a board of directors, he said. Only difference is, if somebody doesn't play nice, we don't sue M, we bury M. We called in the bosses, Joe Bonanno, Tommy Gagliano, Vincent Mangano, Joe Prophesy, and me. The first meeting was tense. Every guy at that table had men who'd shot at the others just months before. But I laid it out, no more wars, no more crowns, no more coups. Any beef, you bring it to the commission. If the vote goes against you, you eat it. If you don't, you won't be around to complain. And we didn't stop with New York. We brought in Chicago, Cleveland, Buffalo, even Al Capone's crew, though by then Capone was doing the government's time. It was the first nationwide network the mob had ever seen, a machine that could run smooth or grind you to pieces. Of course, there was still blood in the ink. Every rule we made came with an unspoken clause, break it, and you're dead. That's what kept it working. Fear and respect in equal measure. That winter, the streets were quiet. Business was booming, gambling, unions, bootlegging, all feeding the machine. For a moment, it almost felt like we'd figured it out. But the thing about peace? It's just the time between wars. And the next one was already on the horizon. They called it progress. I called it owning the city. With the commission keeping the peace, I finally had room to think bigger. Not just rackets on the corners, industries. Whole systems. If $1 moved in New York, I wanted my cut before it hit the bank. The vice rackets were easy money. Gambling joints, brothels, numbers games, we had them humming like well-oiled engines. Cops? They didn't see a thing. Not because they were blind, but because envelopes have a way of closing eyes. Then there were the unions. See, you don't just shake down a union, you run it. Dock workers, truck drivers, construction crews, if they worked with their hands, we had a hand in their pocket. It wasn't just about dues or kickbacks. It was leverage. You control the docks, you control what comes into the city. You control the trucks, you control where it goes. Frank Costello was the genius here. Smooth talker, suited like a banker, but he could freeze a guy's blood with a look. He lined up political connections, got our guys into leadership spots, turned labor disputes into bargaining chips. Strikes? We could start M, stop M, or make M disappear before sunrise. We spread out Jersey, Philly, even Vegas before it had neon. Out west, Meyer was planting seeds in California, setting up gambling ships off the coast. In Cuba, we started whispering about casinos that could make New York look small-time. People like to talk about the American dream, come here with nothing, build yourself up. Well, I came here with nothing but guts and a knack for trouble. Built an empire out of it. And if it meant a few broken bones and bent laws along the way, well, that's just business. But the bigger you get, the more people want a piece. And some of those people don't ask nice. They say the bigger the tree, the harder the wind hits it. And by 36, the wind was howling. It started with whispers, detectives sniffing around gambling joints, reporters hinting at underworld kingpins in the papers. That's nothing new. But then came Dewey. Thomas E. Dewey, the golden boy prosecutor who wanted to make his name by putting mine in the gutter. He didn't come at me with Tommy guns or street ambushes. No. He came with subpoenas, raids, and headlines. He went after the vice rackets first, the brothels, the gambling rooms, hitting places we thought were untouchable. And he didn't stop with the street guys. He wanted me. We had judges in our pocket, cops on our payroll, and politicians who owed us favors. But Dewey? He was clean. Too clean. That made him dangerous. He started flipping small-time operators, squeezing them until they sang. Guys I'd known for years started spilling details, dates, names, prices. A rat can do more damage than a bullet if he's got the right ears listening. The worst part? Dewey knew how to work the public. Every raid was front-page news. Every arrest was a speech about cleaning up the city. He made it look like he was fighting for the people, and in a way, he was. But really? He was fighting for his career. And I was the trophy. Still, I wasn't about to roll over. We moved operations, shuffled crews, burned ledgers. I had Costello smoothing things with our political friends and Meyer cooking up new ways to hide the money. For every door Dewey kicked in, we opened 2 more somewhere else. But in the back of my mind, I knew the man was relentless. And when someone like that gets close enough, it's only a matter of time before they land a punch you can't dodge. They say every king's got a day when the crown slips. Mine came in 36, and it didn't just slip, it hit the floor and rolled away. Dewey finally got his case. Not for murder. Not for racketeering. But for running the city's vice like a private empire. He'd built it brick by brick, witness by witness, until the picture was so clear even a blind jury could see it. The trial was a circus. Press packed the benches, sketch artists scratching my face onto front pages across the country. Dewey strutted around the courtroom like a prizefighter, throwing jabs with every question. My lawyers fought back, tried to paint it all as lies and exaggerations. But the parade of witnesses, girls from the brothels, bookies, bagmen, they all told the same story. My story. I sat there in my tailored suit, playing it cool. Couldn't let M see the sweat. But inside, I knew the tide was turning. This wasn't some backroom deal I could grease my way out of. The jury was eating out of Dewey's hand, and the judge was already sharpening the axe. When the verdict came, it was like a gunshot in slow motion. Guilty. Every count. The sentence, 30 to 50 years in Dannemora, a cold stone box on the edge of nowhere. They didn't just take my freedom. They took my city. Overnight, the streets that used to move on my say-so belonged to somebody else. Crews scattered. Rackets got swallowed by rivals. I was on a one-way ticket to the end of my reign, and everybody knew it. Still, a man like me doesn't die easy. Even in a cell, there's always a way to move the pieces. And as the iron bars clanged shut behind me, I started thinking maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was just a different kind of game. They thought locking me up would take me out of the picture. What they didn't understand was the picture was mine. Dannemora was cold, hard, and built to break men. The walls sweated in the summer, froze in the winter. Guards walked with clubs, and the food tasted like it was boiled in regret. But me? I wasn't some street punk doing his first stretch. I'd built an empire, and I wasn't about to let concrete stop me from running it. First thing I did was get the lay of the land, who ran what, who could be bought, who couldn't be touched. Even in prison, there's a pecking order, and I made sure I was at the top. A carton of cigarettes here, a favor there. Pretty soon, guards were looking the other way, and inmates knew which side their bread was buttered on. Outside, I kept the wires hot. Messages moved through lawyers, family visits, even laundry trucks. Costello and Lansky kept the business humming, but they always checked in. I'd give orders, greenlight deals, settle disputes, all from a cell the size of a closet. It wasn't the same as walking Mulberry Street, but the money still flowed, and my name still carried weight. Funny thing about prison, it strips away the noise. Gives a man time to think. I thought about the game, the moves that got me here, the ones I'd make if I ever got another shot. I didn't kid myself. I knew some doors were closed for good. But as long as I was breathing, I wasn't done. And then, just when I figured the rest of my life would be spent staring at steel bars, the world outside caught fire, and somehow, I was right back in play. They say opportunity knocks. This time, it came wearing a Navy uniform. It was 42, and the war had the whole country on edge. German U-boats were sinking ships right off the coast, and rumors started flying, enemy spies slipping into the docks, sabotage in the shipyards. The Navy was desperate. They needed control of the waterfront, and guess who still had the keys? Even from Dannemora, I had pull. The unions, the stevedores, the longshoremen, all of them remembered who made sure their pockets stayed heavy. So when the Navy came calling, they didn't come with threats. They came with a deal: help us lock down the docks, keep the saboteurs out, and maybe, just maybe, your sentence gets a little shorter. It was the kind of offer you don't turn down. I put the word out through my guys on the outside. They cleaned house on the piers, kept the cargo moving, and made sure nothing and no one slipped through that wasn't supposed to. The Navy got their security, and I got something better: leverage. The whole thing was hush-hush. Newspapers never printed my name, and official records called it * cooperation. *, but in the backrooms and the bars, everybody knew Luciano was working with Uncle Sam. It was funny, the same government that put me away now needed me to keep their war machine running. Months turned into years, and the docks stayed clean. When the war's end started creeping into view, so did the whispers that maybe it was time to cut me loose. I'd played my part. Now it was their turn. That's the thing about power: sometimes it's not about what you've got, but about knowing when to cash it in. And I was about to cash in big. It wasn't like the movies: no dramatic courtroom speeches, no gavel pounding. My freedom came in whispers, signatures, and backroom handshakes. By 46, the war was over, and the Navy didn't need my dock control anymore. But they remembered the deal, and so did I. The talk started slow: parole, commutation, early release. The suits called it * in recognition of services rendered. * I called it payback. When the day came, they didn't open the gates and let me stroll down Mulberry Street. No, there was a catch. I'd walk free, but not in New York. Not even in the States. Deportation, straight back to Sicily, the country I left as a kid. They figured if they dropped me on the other side of the Atlantic, I couldn't stir up trouble here. Leaving wasn't easy. New York wasn't just where I lived, it was where I was. Every brick, every alley, every handshake in a smoky backroom, it was all mine. But a man learns to take what's offered. Prison had been cold steel and concrete. Sicily was sunshine, vineyards, and space to breathe. From there, I could still make calls, send word, keep a hand in the game. The papers painted it like a victory: the great Luciano, gone for good. But my friends knew better. The game doesn't end because you change the field. And I wasn't about to retire to some quiet farmhouse and grow olives. As the ship pulled out, the skyline faded, and I thought about every move I'd made to get here. This wasn't an ending, it was just a new angle. And if New York thought it was done with me, it had another thing coming.